What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of The Square. I'm joined with Gabriel Oros from our aviation team and Callie McGehee from our healthcare team to talk a little bit about their design process and what their day looks like. How you guys doing today?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Doing great, yeah.
All right, well, welcome to The Square. First off, Gabriel, I'll start with you. Just give me a little bit of your background, how you got into architecture, and kind of what was the initial impulse to kind of start this journey?
Wow, I mean, you want to go way back?
Way back. I want it kindergarten.
Yeah, I mean, I was a Legos kid. I mean, and I think anyone who's going to talk to you about their history of architecture is going to have Legos somewhere in there. Loved building things, loved seeing how things work, how things come together. But ultimately, I fell in love with like puzzles, puzzle solving, problem solving. I did this thing called Odyssey of the Mind. I think it's called Destination Imagination now. It was all about like competitive problem solving. And I just love that aspect of like diving into how you see a problem and how you go through the processes to figure it out. And I also fell in love with art. I fell in love with any kind of art and design going through high school. And I was pretty good at math. My dad's a math teacher. And so he really, I could not be bad.
You kind of had a little bit of a leg up. Yeah, he was like, Dad, I can't figure this one out. And he was like, all right, I'll help you.
It was more, he was like, you're going to figure this one out. And we sat at the table and like drilled all through it. So I could do the math and I had the artistic background. And so it was like, okay, how can I mesh these things? And I had one of my art teachers in about 10th grade who said you should look into architecture. That seems like a good fit for you. And the more I started researching it, diving into it, I just started falling in love with what it was, what it represented, how buildings or projects came together. And I said, yeah, this is for me. And so going into school, it very much was about the problem solving, how you execute design ideas, and then was very much about the kind of how you affect someone's experience of a space. And the more I got into that, the more I learned about it, dove into it. I just fell in love with it. And now I want to do it at bigger, grander scales. And so now getting to do it on international airports, the largest scale I can think of to do this. And I couldn't be happier doing it.
Callie, do you like puzzles?
I do like puzzles, maybe not with the same enthusiasm as Gabe for you, but yeah, no, I like puzzles. I was more of a Lincoln Logs kid, though.
Okay.
Like, Legos were cool, but...
Two different camps here.
Yeah, you step on those Legos and you're just, like, in pain for a while. So I was more of a Lincoln Logs kid. And then I think I mentioned this on the last time we talked, but there was this strange little book that I had that was, like, a storybook, and it was kind of all about this little rabbit's, like, journey through its life. And it would, like, it had, like I could not tell you what this book is, but anyway, it had like section cuts of their house. And I just remember being kind of enamored with this and like thinking about like spaces and like looking in them. And I was never like a dollhouse kid. I really did not like Barbies or anything of that nature. I was more of a tomboy. So like fixing things and trying to like, understand. And so this idea of like what are spaces and how do you make them, and like Gabe, like the whole idea of art as I got into high school was like, I loved it. That was like my favorite class, kind of like moving through. And then as soon as I got to college, I was like, okay, well, what's something that, is going to be kind of a job that I could kind of do art, but also not just art, right? It kind of meshes a couple of different things,
But your dad wasn't a math teacher. So
he wasn't. No. My dad was an electrician. So
okay. So I mean maybe
he was always,
I feel like that's going to give you an advantage somewhere.
If not electrocuting yourself.
Actually, when I was studying for my AREs, I was like, Dad, help me out here.
My dad sells software, so I'm pretty much.
Well, if you wanted to be a software architect,
I could be. Yeah, I feel like software has definitely overtaken the solutions architect. They've really started to encroach in architect.
Me so annoyed whenever they use those words, though, because I'm like, you're not an architect.
You're not licensed.
You're not licensed.
I always appreciate it. I feel like we're in a good combined area where it's like someone hears the word architect and architecture and they kind of know what you're talking about. So it's really easy to, if someone says, hey, what do you do? And you go, architect. And they're like, oh, okay, I got it. And they might ask, is software or buildings? And it's a good way to kick off a conversation. But I've always liked being able to just have a concise answer to that. And
yes.
I'm like, well, let me open my dissertation to explain. Like,
people do love it whenever you tell them you're an architect.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, oh, tell me more.
That's exactly what you get.
Like,
ooh, yeah, you get one of those.
Yeah.
It's like, I know what that is, but
like, I don't really know what you do. So tell me about
You
that.
say that, but at being an airport architect, and people find out you do airport architecture, they always want to tell you where to put the paper towels in a bathroom.
Really?
The most grievances, and someone wants to air they want to tell me about what they have problems with, it is the restroom facilities at an airport.
So
10 times out of 10.
Okay, so like, how do you unpack that? Like, how do you actually, like, how much of a say do you have in that? Like, where, as far as like the choices that you're making with the client, like what capabilities do you have to actually change that?
A lot actually, and it comes down to what the level of experience that a client wants to achieve, right? They want to know if they want to hit the code minimum, do they want to do a maximum, or there's numbers called like the ACRP that deals with kind of your passenger experience. And so what's really being adopted in airports now is that it's more about how many people can use a restroom at once for like an ideal optimum experience. So we are seeing, it used to be very like you had code minimum, like based on the occupancy of a space, you had the minimum number of fixtures and that was it. And then it had to be equal, whether it's the same amount of men's as amount of women's. Bar none, that always had to be the rule. And then when it came out that like women spend longer in a restroom versus men on average, so now we are accommodating where there's a lot more women's fixtures than there are men's fixtures to be able to allow for that. And then we're starting to integrate things like family restrooms, adult changing rooms, nursing rooms are all being incorporated into kind of the standard program. And it just comes down to the client and then overall the city that's going to govern that, of saying how many or do they want involved, how many is the requirement, and what kind of, is there a level of service that can be achieved? Because you could hit a code minimum and say, that's not going to be really nice. People are going to be waiting in line. It's always going to break down. And so we have the ability to then drive that number forward and say, no, you want to achieve more in this location to achieve this kind of level of service. So it's a very complex answer, but always just communicate with your client. You can kind of talk them through it.
Well, why paper towels? Like, why do you think people...
Because if you've been in a restroom that has bad like hand dryers or blow dryers and they move around and then there's water everywhere, so they have to like you have like 6 sinks lined up in the front, so people have to wash their hands. But then because of reach distances for ADA, they can't have the paper towel right behind, so they have to go around to the sidewall, and then there's just a soaking wet floor. Like it's the one little thing that can drive a whole experience that can ruin your day at an airport, and so we have to take all of it into consideration how we kind of lay.
Not gonna lie, I'm very like anti hand blower.
I am too. The more you learn, the more disgusting they are.
So nasty. Every time I'm like so grossed out from it. And then I remember doing a bunch of research on like, you know, the paper towels and versus kind of the blow dryer, and just like how you shouldn't like really wash your hands and not dry them, because then you just are attracting more. But I'm just like, what is worse, the air dryer thing that's blowing germs all over me and the wall, or
Dyson's just making money hand over fist, and you know, he's just like, oh, I'll get them on the air wrap. That'll satiate them.
Also the noise. It's like a very auditory thing for me that I'm just like,
the extreme blowers, the ones that are
so loud.
At you,
I can't. It's like chalkboard.
We wanted an hour discussion to sit here and talk about
airport bathroom,
washing your hands and drying your hands.
I think so many times. I think it's hard to like. I think it's hard to tell somebody like when you're in a space and they're like, I really don't like that, for you to be like, yeah, me too. Like I feel like sometimes it takes the like ownership that you have of a space. I mean, obviously you didn't design every space, and I think no one would argue that. But like, it takes the ownership out of like, yeah, I agree with you. Callie, is there ever like like feedback that you've gotten on like a one project that you've been like, okay, the way that they reacted to that in like the built environment, I'm going to carry that into like the next project? Is there anything? Is that an emotion, or is that like a specific like design example?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure that there is. I have to kind of think on it for a second. I feel like a lot of mine are sometimes like interior like design based, where I'm like, oh, I see, yeah, you're not a big fan of this, but you have this standard and we kind of have to adhere to XYZ standard with the facility. So it's like, I don't know, I have to still enforce this, you know, I still have to go with this, but we'll try to make it in a way that really suits more your needs, kind of thing. I don't think that really answers the question, but I don't know. That's something that I'm always kind of like thinking about in the back of my head, is like, okay, if we have to use these finishes or we have to use these materials, like how are we going to make that so it's like makes it your space and not just like a generic space kind of thing. Something that I always feel like I fight with a little bit.
I think one thing that would be good, Callie, can you just kind of give me, we know that Gabriel does aviation architecture. Can you talk about just kind of like
Designs all the restrooms.
I
all,
design
he's
paper
the,
towel location.
He's the restroom.
I'm
Gabriel's
a
the
representative for Torque. If you have any business, let me know.
Restroom specialist is what it says on your business card, I think. Callie, give me a little bit of your background, because I know Gabriel's been on the Square a couple of times, but for those who don't know, kind of give us your kind of who are you and
Who
what do
am
you do?
I? Ooh, big question.
Yeah.
So I work in the healthcare studio here at Corgan, obviously. I've been on the healthcare studio team for about, I guess, 8 years now. I've had a little bit of adventuring into aviation in the past, and then higher education as well, just for a smidge of time. But I've always found myself coming back to healthcare. The projects that I do on a daily basis are anywhere from like some hospital to renovation, like new ground hospital and renovation, and then a lot of developer work as well in terms of like medical office buildings, those facilities that you'll go to, for your regular doctor checkup or for any sort of like specialty kind of procedure or whatnot. So, and then I work kind of half and half, or I'm like an interesting little hybrid here where I have most of my background in architecture, so I'll do exterior, core, and shell, but I've also had the opportunities to go ahead and do interior design and kind of the programming aspect of a lot of, because healthcare in general is so much based on the program, like especially in your hospitals and your ASCs and things like that, your ambulatory surgery centers. I mean, that is all based on like patient flow. It's very similar in some ways to aviation because you've got a very specific flow that you have to maintain, of specific adjacencies with different rooms, and then of course we've got our different codes that we have to adhere to. So I kind of waffle between both interior and exterior on that.
I feel like with such there's so much like cutting edge technology, I guess, do you struggle with like having to kind of fit? Is it more just like if it's an MRI machine fitting like whatever that like square footage need is, or do you find the technology sometimes affecting the flow and kind of the order of like how a space will permit itself to be utilized?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it does. I mean, with an MRI machine, for example, I mean, we've had MRIs for a really long time, right? I mean, people have been getting MRIs for ages now. But
I had one this morning.
Did you?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah, every morning.
Every morning. It's interesting because just the way you bring in the MRI machine will affect kind of how you lay out the space, because you've got to come in through a certain wall width, etc. You can't be next to kind of other exterior like metal things, so cars cannot be in the area because the Gauss lines will it'll create conflict, etc. So like, yeah, that definitely affects kind of where we situate it in the plan, but also just how people in the space, the staff, will be wanting to use that, wanting to kind of come from there, pick up their patient, walk them to, the dressing so that they can change, and then kind of go over to the MRI suite and then come back, and just like, what is that flow that's efficient for staff but also comfortable for patients, because you don't want somebody just like wandering down the hall to this that may or may not be scary to them, right? And then with new technologies, I mean, that's obviously always kind of evolving, and I expect that our floor plans, our layouts, our workflows will also evolve as a result, just because now we're not needing the same types of we're not the same types of kind of tangible things. Cause
like what? Like give me an example of something that used to be implemented a lot that isn't really kind of seen as something.
Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of times too, like most of your like one of the things that we've talked about a lot, and I on our team, was kind of self-rooming, right? So instead of having someone, and Stacy or Chris probably have talked about it with someone on the Square at some point in time, but essentially, like, instead of having you check in as the patient check in, and then you have to wait in the waiting room, and then you kind of are walked over to your exam room, and then you're waiting in the room for a while. Like, now you're just kind of able to kind of self-room, so you check yourself in, and whether it's mobily or not, and kind of go straight to your room. So there's not the same type of interactions with people. Now, I mean, different populations like it different ways, right? Like, so your older generation may not love that, whereas someone who's younger may be like, sweet, I don't have to talk to people today. You know, I can kind of minimize my interactions.
That's something that you've talked about, just you and I talking about having like the self-checkouts and how like in some of the newer like airports and I guess lobbies, I don't know the correct term, but like it's they're moving more to the mobile, and that obviously has a cost drop for the airport and for the airlines. But I guess how are those changes? Like how is that technology like also affecting? And I guess once something, because I think we saw this with like self checkout. Like I saw that like my wife works for Target, and she doesn't work at a Target, she works for a Target. I have to always clarify, but she. They were really big as far as like one of the first, with Walmart to do like the self checkouts. And now you're seeing with like a lot of the like loss prevention, like they're moving away from that. So it's like they implemented this technology that was supposed to be kind of this game changer. And then, 10, 15 years later, like they're moving it back. Is that ever a consideration to be made?
I mean, there's not a lot of loss prevention in an airport, but it is about security. And then what we're finding in our conversations with airlines, the big focus is on valued interactions. And so if someone is coming in and the term ticketing lobby is going away because there's no ticketing being done anymore, because American Airlines, for example, found that 50% of people that go up to a ticket counter don't have to go to a ticket counter. They had the mobile boarding pass. They just go up there because that's the part of the process. And so by implementing new technology and encouraging people to use their phones more, use mobile screening to go through it, they kind of streamline that process for everyone. It takes all those people out of line. You can address, therefore, if you have to talk to someone one-on-one, it's a much more valuable interaction. That time's not being wasted. So that's what's really driving that kind of technological integration. And so making sure that like you're more independent, there's technology to support you, but that person-to-person is what's going to drive that forward. But they're also trying to streamline that process all across so that there is, when they have their employees, they're doing those higher value interactions. So at the gate, they're going to try to reduce numbers so that one person's kind of overseeing, whereas those mundane processes, boarding check is going to e-gate, so you're just going to scan to be able to walk on the aircraft. And then if you have an issue with an oversized bag or something, that's when they're going to deal with you one-on-one to kind of resolve that independently. So it's far more about that value of service than it is just about trying to kind of cut costs everywhere.
How are you continuing your education? Like, how do you stay sharp day to day?
So my favorite thing probably is to go to a lot of the lectures that they offer with the Dallas Architecture Forum. I try to hit up those regularly. And that's more from just a thought starter as far as design goes. Because I think that you can really find inspiration in a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I work in healthcare, so I can only look at healthcare spaces. Like, no, for sure, not at all. I mean, honestly, a lot of the things that I love are more residential based because I just think the scale of them is like really beautiful, and obviously it's really high grade materials in a lot of those cases as well. So I think, and just hearing people speak, the way they speak about their projects, the way they tell the story, the journey, I think is always really helpful too, to like kind of think back and reflect on how we can tell our story better, what we want our clients to understand from the things that we're laying out in front of them, and how to get them to say, yes, we love that idea, right? Because sometimes it's all about how you narrate your idea. If you can't communicate it effectively, then no one really understands it, which I think is something that I wish maybe, I don't know, sometimes I think that architects are so visual people. We don't always verbally communicate the best. Just kind of depends. But I think once you have that locked down, then there's no really stopping.
What was this is for both of you, what was this can be architecture or non-architecture, what was the last thing you were like truly inspired by? Like what was something that you found truly remarkable?
I'll give you an odd one
Okay.
that hit me recently, which was I just finished watching relatively recently the on Netflix series called Arcane, and it was their first commissioned anime that Netflix did. And it is visually one of the most incredible series that I've ever seen. And the level of detail into the composition, the framing of every scene, It's all set in this Art Nouveau style, which I've always loved the Art Nouveau. And so the level of detailing into the Art Nouveau, it is just an incredible representation of storytelling through lighting, and graphic imagery, and it's a fun story too. Like I highly recommend watching. It's really interesting the way they go through it. But I was just blown away at the level of depth into how they got to the storytelling, both visually and with the visual story itself. And so, highly recommend. It was an amazing piece to watch.
Are you typically an anime fan?
Sometimes I've been getting into it a little more recently. I think that there's something with the stories and the kind of obscurity in the stories that's not as typical, not as direct, obvious story arc that you're getting to, that I've really begun to appreciate. Some unique character development, and then the risks that some of the animators and animation teams are taking to see some amazing things, or you're really seeing a different side of what could be possible in animation.
Yeah. I asked because I'm not typically like a huge fan of like the animation style of most anime. And so I like wondered if it was kind of in line with that or if it was a little bit different. I did really love the like Blue Eye Samurai. That was like, I just like loved the story. I actually really loved like kind of the animation style on that one too. But it was a little bit different. Like, I don't know, than most.
I think to me, it really goes back to I love, especially in movies and TV shows, anything that there's a full depth of composition of now I can get the word easily, composition, of all the different aspects. So that's why I always loved, like, Star Wars is always a favorite. My number one favorite movie is Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great story, but also all the effort that went into the giant puppetry, the score. You have John Williams composing this amazing piece, and that all these things are storytelling on top of each other, and the way they layer in is so immaculately done and brilliant that the other films that followed up just don't have that level, because the intensity of everything put into those is just not there. It's more kind of...
Well, it builds a world, right? I mean, it doesn't just build a story. It builds kind of more than that.
Exactly. And it builds a sense of realism and a sense of like just a wonder of all those pieces that got put together. And I think that's always what then brought me back to architecture, is that it's not just one experience. So you can't enjoy the beautiful space and ignore the plumbing and electricity and AC. Right. Like, everything has to work together. Everything has to like tie and be a composed piece. And when all those things work together, nothing has to be hidden. They can all be celebrated, because they're all these wonderful things that make that end piece just a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say like Harry Potter is kind of in the same vein. Like I mentioned this to you guys before, but yeah, when I read those books as a kid, and then even when I watch the movies now, it is always so interesting to me just how much of it is a complete world. There was not, I guess if you go down like a Reddit, deep dive, someone out there has found something that's inconsistent and wrong, but I'm not here to like pick at things. So, but there's like such a level of depth, like you're saying, to kind of the whole world, that there's nothing that they've really forgotten in terms of...
I'm a big Star Trek fan, and there's multiple occasions where people have done like scale models of pick your favorite Enterprise, and they'll be like, these floors are like inconsistent, and like, they're talking about a show that was built on a shoestring budget, in the early 60s, right? And it's like, oh, these floor heights are inconsistent, and engineering wouldn't be placed that way. And I'm like, okay, we understand like there's some limitations there, and I think that's what I think the best part's like. My wife and I are watching Severance right now, and I'm sure James and Brandon will do an episode on it at some point. But what I love from that show is there's obviously a heavy influence of like Dieter Rams and like the work that he did with Braun, but it's like you get a sense of I have a physical reaction when I watch that show. It makes me feel uneasy. And what I love about just the design of the spaces is it's meant to make you feel that way. You're meant to feel uncomfortable in the same way that like we're on the movie kick now is like, you watch Blade Runner 2049, and subconsciously, I don't know if I actually had the thought occur in my brain, but like my body reacted to some of those spaces. And I get the same thing now, just having a better understanding, having worked at this firm for a while, of getting a better understanding of kind of the reaction that I'm supposed to feel sometimes, and kind of being more in tune with that. And I think that's something that for the general public, for like the civilians, I think is something that happens subconsciously. But I think the best thing about like kind of having these conversations is to know kind of where those intentions lie. Gabriel kind of talked about a lot, like coming out of school, kind of giving. I think his exact words was he didn't know anything. I kid.
It's true though. I mean, anyone like you feel like you're inexperienced because the difference of when you're in school versus when you're at a real business, it is a night and day difference of how you approach projects and what you're physically working on.
Well, the question I was kind of looking to get towards was kind of the theme of the episode was like the design process. I know when we had, because kind of how we all got to talking about this was we had done some videos for some social videos for Architecture Week for the AIA. And, you were talking a little bit about your process and kind of making it your own. I'd like to get more of kind of your feedback on kind of how you were taught or kind of what the initial kind of intention was there, and kind of over time, kind of through your expertise, like how have you changed your design process to kind of make it your own and respond to the kind of work that you do?
Yeah. I think that's kind of interesting because in some ways I think that it actually is still similar to how I used to operate when I was in school. I mean, there's obviously some major differences being in an office versus like just a
Give me an example.
Studio, but I mean, your schedule for one, you're designing kind of within a schedule versus, I mean, yeah, in school it was, you had a schedule, but it was not, the deliverable was not based on kind of like, an actual client, right? So who you're designing for, the schedule within which you're designing, I mean, all of those kind of change. I think the pace at which I work, maybe the areas that I'll find inspiration in, or just kind of like the parameters with which we have to work for a certain type of space. But in terms of like how I work or how I think a lot of that is still like really, really quite the same. I mean, I love collaborating, kind of starting off with some sort of a jam session within our studio and just like bouncing ideas off of people. A lot of times I'll find it'll be kind of like where I am in the moment or in my day or in my life or whatnot. I'll find something that's like, that would be like a really interesting detail to work in. Like, is this the project that we could kind of get that detail in, and how do we apply it? Do we apply it in the same specific way that I've seen it? Probably not. So how else can we integrate that within kind of this space, whether it's interior, whether it's exterior, right? And then I think normally after we kind of go through that whole initial thought process, there's a little bit of sketching that happens. I don't do as much like built models, like I think as maybe we should. Actually, the lecture that I went to the other day, they were kind of talking about how they still build every project with model making, and I'm like, why don't I take my trash samples and like start building with it? I mean, why not? Mm-hmm. Which is also a thing that I think about often. And I was talking with Aaron in the library. I was down there one day and somebody had thrown away some stuff that didn't work for them. And I'm like, this is like amazing. This is like so much stuff I'm a little raccoon. There's like so much stuff to pull from right here that I can find inspiration from, and whether or not it actually gets used in. So I think for me, it's about kind of looking around the world that I'm currently existing in, right? That place and time, and like what can I find that might be applicable and kind of trigger a response.
Was there something that you're kind of like what was the last thing that happened on?
Oh, so this imaging clinic that I'm working on. So I went down to the library and I found this like really fun Lumicore panel that was like very reflective, and I was like, she said she wanted mirror, but mirrors gives me 80s. So how can we revisit this and kind of tweak it a little bit? And so, grabbed that panel and worked it into the design, and I mean, she loved it. The client loved it. So it's just kind of that, and thinking about, okay, what is someone else's, throwaway might be something that works for us. which is probably such a 60-year-old woman thing to say. But,
you look good for 60.
Thanks. Yeah. 70s are my decade.
Well, we know you love a glass block.
I do.
So.
I know. I know. I went to the Swiss Avenue Homes tour this weekend, and it was really cool. And then one of the homes, actually, it was the Higginbotham home, and it was done by Lance Otto Lang. Otto Lang, that's who it was. And he was like an apprentice or whatnot with a Wright. And so it has very Reichen, I don't know what you would call that.
Reichen. I like Reichen. Yeah.
It has some very Reichen kind of, forms and design, I guess, motif to it, right? But then they redid a portion of the backyard for like their daughter's wedding, which I'm like, wow, do you want to adopt me too? And the bottom portion, they had a basement, and they did the skylight with glass block, and my friends were like, that's a little, it's a little much. And I was like, it is, but I also kind of like it. I mean, I don't know that they did it right, but I love that the intention was there. They tried, right? And so, because it was a skylight for the basement, but anyway, it was kind of a fun little side story.
Do you guys feel like sometimes, like, I always look at, I think I've mentioned this before, but like Zillow Gone Wild, I absolutely love.
Oh yeah,
I love
Zillow Gone
Wild. I love that Instagram. And sometimes it's like, yeah, there are some big swings, right? Like sometimes literally they're swings, right? But like
literally
there are some moves in there that you're like, I see what they're going for, and this place definitely feels lived in. It definitely feels like a home. I guess, Gabriel, do you ever have a moment, like how often are you like self-editing yourself with a client? Is that a problem that you have of like, oh, they're not going to go for this, or they wouldn't like this? Or how often are you like kind of jump into the deep end with them and saying like, hold my hand, I got a crazy idea for you?
More often than you think, to give kind of a wild, to throw out a wild idea. But it comes back to the storytelling. And I mean, I fully believe that we are salespeople first. And if you come with a crazy idea, but your rationale and reasoning of why you're doing it and why it's going to help the space and why it's solving some problem they need to execute, it makes sense. It's going to be rational at the time. And it's something that like you're convincing them to spend that money because you're going, hey, you're trying to do this and I'm going to do it with this crazy idea. And if you've built the trust and relationship, they're going to go, yeah, that's a responsible idea. And it might not be at the time, but
you'll figure out a way to make it.
Well, the most direct example I can give you for the high C gates at DFW was that we wanted to introduce a monumental signage component for all the gates. And we tried looking at like something that was very digital, didn't impede the space too much. And so we threw out this notion of this large blue element that was sized based on the screens that were available at the time. We were trying to get the most view angles around it, so it formed this foil shape around it, and it's incredibly imposing. And in the first like conversations of having it show into the client, it looked like something that to take to the idea they would have said, "What the heck are you bringing us?" And we just kind of said, hey, trust us, like you're trying to achieve this. You want to mark where the gate's going to be. You want to give a level of indication. And they said, all right, well, let's move forward. Like it makes sense. It rationally makes sense. And then even when the first mock-up went in, I'll never forget, because we put the first mock-up on site and the client literally said, what the hell is this? This is so big. Like, it's not going to work. And I had to say, like, look, trust me, this is going to be effective. Like, it's going to be for what you need. It fits the space. And once they were all installed, they fit the space, and it's been so well received by the public, they're adapting it campus-wide. And they're getting other airlines and other airports saying, yeah, we want to do something similar to that because the size of it is so visible everywhere. The size of the screen lets you know where when your gate's going to take off, when your plane's going to take off, and so the anxiety level drops. People are willing to go further away from the gate to spend more money because they can see it there. And so all the things that seem like a really crazy, wild architectural intervention had all the rationale behind it to why we need to keep it. And now it's been incredibly well received, and they want to even do more of them. So it's just, you can have that swing, but you got to put some legs behind it if you want to do something crazy. And when you do that, you can really kind of shoot for the moon.
The worst thing they could say is no, right?
Absolutely. Well, they can fire you.
What was your internal process, your internal thoughts when they were like, what the heck?
Trust yourself. I will say it really helped that that was when we started integrating VR. And so I could go in and you could physically stand in the space, even though it wasn't built, and kind of get an idea of proportion. You kind of just have to trust yourself. And I think there's not a single designer at this firm that has never gone back and second guessed a design decision they made. But sometimes it's our skill and ability is to edit and say, okay, that was a bad idea, or no, this is going to be a good one. Let me see it through to the completion. I can show you it was a great idea. And we're all going to be there. We're going to have the opportunity, and you just have to see it forward.
Yeah, I think that that's like a kind of an interesting point, because going back to your original question about like education in school and things like that, one of those things that you start to learn in school, right, is kind of, this is my idea, this is how I tell the story. And then obviously your professors are going to be like, whatever, the torturous architecture school stories you hear. But, insert those. But I mean, I think you learn to trust yourself over time and kind of how to navigate some of those conversations, because your professor's always was playing kind of the devil's advocate, right? And you just never know when you're presenting to a client, like what their reaction will be. They may love it off the top, immediately. And they may be like you're saying, and you have to kind of walk them through that thought process.
But I mean, that's the exciting part of the job, right? That's what it means to go about this, and why anyone can't do it, or why we're saying anyone couldn't do it. That we are the ones who you go to.
Well, then you end up with Zillow Gone Wild.
Yeah, exactly.
Zillow Gone Wild seems like a lot of let's say a lot of DIY.
Yes.
There's probably some self-proclaimed contractors
for
doing
sure
their own work.
What I love about all that is it was someone built it for themselves.
Yeah.
They wanted that, and they saw it through, and they did it. And yeah, you may not like it, but it wasn't your house. I mean, yeah,
Exactly.
if you were going to buy it, you'd have to. But
sure, but
it was someone who just if they wanted some crazy tiger themed room and installed pillars of fake tigers, like. It's their jam. Like they wanted to do it.
That's what they wanted.
And I think we get the opportunity to design these spaces, especially when you're designing a space for yourself. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, as long as you can afford it. And I appreciate that. I think someone getting to do that. Yeah, we may go, oh my God, what a terrible design decision. But there's some fun being able to have that freedom.
I think you're right, because we were talked about kind of like that subconscious reaction to things. And I think when I react strongly to a space or even just a facade, what upsets me is like a lack of intention or like direction in the design. And I mean, the way that comes out most often is just like way too many materials, right? Like there's like more than 4, like I start to kind of get
well, that's just overwhelming, right?
Right. And I think I get a better sense of and not to say that to have just like one material makes it a better space, but it's more so just like to know that there was like, this is what they were trying to accomplish, makes me feel, I guess, a better understanding of, I guess, maybe how I'm supposed to react or kind of what the initial intention was there. But you're right, like it doesn't have to be, there's that big knock against like millennial gray, and now it's turning into like millennial green, right? But it's like, no,
that's a thing?
Millennial green is the new.
What does that mean?
People are like, oh, it's not gray, it's green. Like our walls are not at our house. They're not gray.
Okay,
they're dolphin. They're dolphin fin.
Dolphin fin.
Dolphin fin, which is a blue green. It's a blue gray.
This is a little upsetting to me. Green is my favorite color. I drive a green car. I have a green phone. I'm wearing green pants.
But is it almost gray green? Or
no,
green? Yeah,
no, it's green.
You're probably fine. You're probably good.
And I have loved green for a really long time. So I am a millennial. Oh. So this is a little upsetting to me. Also, that I'm finding this out on this podcast.
It's almost like when I've traveled before where you just kind of admit that you're going to look like a tourist.
Yeah.
No.
And once you let that go, you're like, oh yeah, give me the Hawaiian shirt and goofy hat. Like let me full on adopt this, and then you're free. You're totally free, because it's like I don't have to worry about it. I'm not self-conscious. Like, yeah, I'm gonna be this tourist.
Yeah.
You're gonna walk through Paris like bonjour and like just be that guy. Like,
are you that guy?
There comes a time where you're either trying to hide it or you're just embracing it.
Oh, I'm usually always trying to hide it.
I'll tell you what it was. It was like when I finally like started buzzing and shaving my head, when it was like, yeah, I'm bald. let's own that.
Bald and proud.
And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. And it's the greatest feeling in the world to just like let that go.
I will say, going back to design, that's actually what I love about a lot of design is kind of when people do really have the freedom. They some of those, when you're talking about initial reactions, there's a lot of times when my initial reaction to the space might be like, oh, maybe don't. But there's also kind of like a celebratory thought in my head that's like, good, you decided to go for it. Like you just went for it. And, take it or leave it. Maybe we could self-edit some things, but it's part of the iterative process, right? That is design. Maybe next time it'll be better. But I do think that there's always something that's like really inspiring about something or someone just like letting the space be authentically what it is, right? I don't know if they have one idea and they're trying to just like really, that is all plastered all over the walls, and you're like, that's a lot, but you definitely stayed on theme, and I think there's something kind of nice about that. I mean, I think, it comes back to that idea of freedom that I just think is really, really nice. But I also think that then that's, your Zillow gone wild. And then if you're a true designer, you're always self-editing, right? So then there's that intention that you're talking about starts to become a little bit more noticeable. It becomes more evident over time.
This is something that I think you guys have both broached the subject on, but how do you pitch and design for, there's all this conversations around like attention spans are getting shorter, and obviously you said there's lots of distractions, things like that. So like even from the client all the way through to like the end user, I guess, how are y'all designing, and what's the design process like for people that have short attention spans?
I mean, I think a lot of times the shortest attention spans for healthcare environments, I mean, people are all kind of always anxious about kind of going in, etc. Like whether or not, it depends on kind of what procedure it is. And then I also think you have like children when you're designing for children, which are obviously like very short attention spans, much more so than a lot of like adults. That a lot of times is like kind of about like this idea of positive distraction and kind of creating like moments for the kids to kind of interact with, to keep them distracted, whether it's, personal interactions with another human or just like something visual on the wall, etc. I did a small clinic for like behavioral health kids in a behavioral health setting. And basically it was all about creating kind of these very specific moments, whether it was like a reading nook for them to kind of have one-on-one time with their therapist, or a seated nook, so that was felt a little bit more like a cocoon. So creating very specific kind of environments for them to kind of thrive in. And then I think, you can do kind of additional visuals, etc. And then for adults, I mean, I think it's a lot about like providing a very clear path, and then whether or not it's signage or like, I think wayfinding as a result of the building itself, kind of the design, so that the person knows. Because the last thing, when you're already anxious about kind of what you're going in for, whether it's like a normal checkup or like, I think there's just some things that we don't realize that our body has a response to, even if like it's just your typical physical, right? And so I think creating like a very simple path, a very simple circulation path, something that is like very obvious, like so that at least whenever you get from one point to the other, like you're not like, great, I'm lost, cool. I'm lost, I'm late for my appointment, I don't know what's gonna happen today. Like, so just to eliminate a lot of those other kind of smaller, I don't know, like problems that you might have upon arrival to your appointment or to, and I think the craziest thing is when I was working in one of the hospitals, like this hospital was just like, oh my God, a maze. And I was just like, I don't know how anybody finds their way around here, right? So I wasn't even there for anything other than, a client meeting, that I just was noticing like people being kind of confused. And I think when you go a lot of times, of course you learn, but anything we can do to kind of help that be a little bit more of a clear path. Or like, and having people that you interact with, right? People available to kind of direct you if you need or ask questions, I think is always kind of helpful as well. Now that's a little bit more operations than it is, right? But having those moments for a person if needed.
Yeah, in the aviation world, it's as far as designing towards kind of ADD or kind of those touch points or losses of attention, it's been about reducing the amount of clutter. They're reducing the kind of visual experience. I know for DFW, the space that we had, that initially they had a regular column grid of every 26 feet, and there was a column and a beam and everywhere. And if you go to kind of the low C, now it's still there, you can see what that rhythm looks like. And then the industrial engineers at the time that needed signage for that space, they said, well, there's a vertical surface on a beam, put a sign up there. Or there's a column, put a sign up there. And as a result, we then went back and talked about where signage could be to kind of refine that conversation and really whittle it down. And because of that, we went down from what was in a given space that we had was 144 signs, I think, and we reduced it to 6. And just because that was all that's really needed, there was kind of an effort to. It was so oversigned and overstimulated that like every 26 feet, I didn't even need to be reminded that those still same gates are still that direction, and nothing changed. Therefore, why would you need to change that? And so, being able to be aware of what a passenger flow is, where those decision points are, and knowing that that's the point where you do need to decide where you're going to go, and then to maybe there is some level of reinforcing it, but to really just reduce how much is taken away, that's going to reduce those opportunities for distraction, and that's what makes a much more seamless, cohesive passenger flow design layout.
How much can you guys control, like advertisements, for example?
It's all going to depend on who the client is and who's really driving that. So like with our space is like we're doing a space we're with American Airlines, but it's in a DFW space, and DFW has the lease contracts, and so it's all handshake agreements and being playing nice in the sand of what's not going to detract away from the passenger experience and be distracting from the wayfinding and signage. What are the opportunities that's going to limit that bit of advertising? But it is also a win for the airport as well, because the less advertising you have, the more premium the spaces are, and so the more that they can charge for the advertising, and it's a lot more. Those advertising groups are more interested in investing in that as like a higher quality advertisement, if you will. If it's something like a digital experience or some sort of what they call unmanned advertisement, where it's like you have a car or something.
Right.
So I mean, it's a lot more interactive rather than just, hey, we're slapping a poster on a wall.
Yeah.
They're more inclined to do something more effective with it.
Because like healthcare spaces and hospitals, there's some advertisement, but it's not necessarily to the same, I would say, degree as like what you might see in some of those aviation airports that you're talking about. And so that's why I kind of wondered, because I think when I'm traveling through there, that can be the most distracting portion of it as far as like clutter, aside from kind of your built, but like, does it take away from your actual roadmap signage?
And we had to go through that battle a lot with the groups, because we two of the main areas that we have for our passenger flow are where the main wayfinding directional signage is, and they would be perfect real estate for advertising. Was the most prime real estate. However, we had to argue back and say, if you put advertising on there, it's going to detract away from the wayfinding, and someone's going to look and not be able to see it. Therefore, it's off limits. And so they were not happy about it. The advertising group was not happy about it, but that was just because of the experience and narrative that we had set up with American Airlines gave them the leverage to be able to use that towards them and say, you can't have that because that goes against the overall design directive of this space. Therefore, we're not putting it there, and put the foot down. And that was the end of the conversation. And so we get to assist them in that conversation, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's cool.
It honestly could ruin the whole experience of the space, but being able to just continuously reinforce what that narrative is with them and remind them what we're trying to achieve with this space, and not look at the short return on dollars from advertising, but the long-term passenger experience keeps that fresh in their mind, and they want to abide by it.
How often do you guys think about your legacy?
Never.
Great.
Truly. No, truly. I don't. I don't. But again, I'm maybe I'm just a little bit of hippy dippy there, but I'm kind of like, your legacy will be what your legacy is. I don't want to try to kind of control some specific narrative, because you never know where things or where life will take you. So by doing that, you might be limiting your possibilities, right? But I mean, this is like a very like.
Well, no, I think it's because I think a lot of times, like when you see, like, obviously we work at a large firm, but like, you have I think so often, like what the public's perception of an architect is like driven by like your star architects, right? Your Zaha Hadid's, your Marlon Blackwell's. And I think so much of I don't know what it is. It's like, they are obviously building this myth around them or this narrative that they've kind of established to kind of help sell their work and kind of give an easy access point. I think it's not a crutch, but I think it's something that's just kind of easily, it just kind of happens. I don't know, especially when you're, coming from like a media landscape where it's like things are made and consumed and they may be like revisited again at some point, even if you're doing like kind of higher level media, like a film or a television show. A lot of the work is kind of meant to serve like a purpose and then it kind of goes away. So you start thinking about like a built environment that...
I mean, that's there to stay, for sure.
Right.
I guess my thought process is, like, do you really think that, like, Marlon or, like, Zaha went in and was like, I'm going to create this legacy about myself. This is the story I'm going to tell about myself. No, I think they designed really... They're very skillful designers, and I think they worked and they put a lot of time in. And kind of the things that we know about them today is based on kind of their work over time, their designs over time, whether it's, Marlon, his cost-effective kind of like beautiful design or, whatever it may be. I guess in my head, when you ask that question, I think like, do you think about curating a narrative for yourself? Like specifically? No, but I don't think that those people really did either. I mean, of course, once they got a little bit, there's, social media, whatever you
laurels,
have to, of course, once you get to a certain point, but I think that their work kind of started to speak for itself. And I do think that like a building, for example, you're right, it stays for a long time. And I do think about that, like the things that I'm working on, especially the developer driven ones, because a lot of times those are, they're leased out for a period of time. And once the developer kind of sells it and then, like you don't know the longevity necessarily of some of these buildings. But I think that in my head, if we're going to take a green space and we're going to turn it into something built, it needs to be well designed. It needs to be, we need to think that it's going to be there for a really long time and age well and kind of make a mark on that land. Because if we're going, if we're going to kind of scar the land, I think that it should be for a worthy cause, Maybe that's me circling back to just being a little, I don't know.
No, I like that. No, for me, it's always been about the kind of community impact. And it's not so much like, am I going to create a design language that everyone's going to know is my signature design language, but it's can I positively influence the community and get people to make someone's kind of experience of some place better. And I think what's always really, really drawn me to aviation design is that it's, you are the first impression and last impression of a city or a country. It's you're the one thing that someone's really going to kind of state that claim and people become really prideful of, and they really take a lot of ownership in what's there. And being able to be a part of that conversation and knowing that you're kind of impacting the way someone's going to begin and end that journey and within that city, and so many people are going to be then affected by it. It's just such. It's the best kind of experience. I've gotten, worked on a big project here in Dallas, and having friends who have gone through it independently without me, and they've said, "Oh, I just traveled through your terminal. It's beautiful. I loved it. It was so much easier. It was so great to travel through it." Like that's the best feeling in the world. That has positively affected someone, and they know about it, had that experience, they felt better about it. And that part of usually when someone tells you a story about traveling, they tell you how awful it was, how terrible the flight was, and to just like lift that out. And so you know that you're making, maybe it's a vacation better, maybe it's they're traveling for they're moving jobs, and so they're scared of moving to a new city, and the first thing they see in their first experience is this nice, warm, welcoming space, and they feel like they know what they're doing. It's going to set that tone for their entire potential experience within a city. And to be a part of that conversation, that opportunity, to me, like that's the cool, impactful point. Like I don't think there's anything revolutionary about the world of airports or even about architecture in general that I'm going to set the world on fire. But to know that you're like positively impacting someone's life that way, that's why I do it. That's why I want to keep doing it, and I would have the most fun and to me get the most value and satisfaction out of.
We did a couple of things video-wise for BNA in Nashville, and I got to fly out there independently for a guy's trip, and I was just, I had no ownership over it, but just to kind of be able to, having talked to the people on that team and kind of knowing what their intentions were, and to kind of see that, actually, there was this incredible, in the food court, they've got these like beautiful skylights, right, to kind of give some natural space, and they got these awesome trees in the area, and I'm just sitting there like eating my lunch, and like I look over, and there's like two pilots, and they're just like illuminated by this skylight, and not like glare or anything, they're just they have light on them, like it's a like a warm presence, and I was just so like I was like, is anybody seeing this? Like this kind of beautiful, picturesque, it looks, if you hadn't known we were in an enclosed space, it felt very, like a courtyard. And I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
I did it.
And it's also the point, and going back to earlier, like these are huge puzzles.
Right.
For me, aviation is this incredibly complex organism that you have to bend and move and get all the pieces start working together and everything to function correctly. And then to do that and make a beautiful, elegant space out of that someone does have like this, they're a positive experience, and it's you feel calm and well lit. It's like you've done all these things. You haven't just solved the problem, but you've done it effectively, and you've done it beautifully and elegantly, and have someone that really like can appreciate it and admire it. And I think being able to know that you solved that puzzle, like that's the legacy that like I really appreciate and I've always really enjoyed, and really keeps me coming back to work every day, is being able to just know you achieved that, I guess.
It's really interesting to me because I'm thinking about some of the airports that I've flown into. And I wonder, does your friends that have flown through, do they ever come back to you and tell you like, oh, it was XYZ that I noticed, like that made this like so.
Yeah, they say it was the paper towel dispenser in a bathroom.
The
I had an awful time there.
Really?
But it's all those moments. Like everything you could do could be totally undone by one small, terrible design iteration.
The things that I noticed about some of the newer airports that I've flown into that I really enjoy, BNA or MSY. Is actually the daylighting and just how open those spaces feel. And I don't know if anybody remembers the old MSY in New Orleans, but it was like everything in New Orleans. It was very old and just grody. And so I think like going through this time, it's obviously it's like a lot brighter. And then I think too, like when I've gone to Palm Springs and like obviously you go through kind of ticketing, that's closed off. Everything else leading up to your actual, it's a very small airport, but leading up to your actual gates is open. It's daylight, it's all open. And I just think that's like kind of such an interesting concept. And of course, things for different people are, right, it changes. For me, I realized, I love the daylighting in those spaces. And even in the spaces that I designed today for like healthcare facilities too, I'm like always wanting like more glass. How can we bring more kind of that outside in? And then of course, I guess maybe just because I'm a nature girl, so I'm like, I love that, right? Makes you feel a little bit less clinical. It makes you feel a little bit less sterile, right? Than when you're kind of going through that process of TSA, et cetera.
And we're also seeing a huge turn in the world of acoustics and acoustic control. I think spaces that you can really tell a difference of the higher level of kind of development is when there's a lot of acoustic balance, and then so it's really brought down to where we're finding that within airport environments, the more sound you absorb, the less crowded a space feels, because it's not just constant echoing.
That is true, because I've tried to be on my phone before, and I'm like, well, this is useless. I can't hear anything you're saying. So.
And it just brings a whole level of anxiety and your kind of bioresponse down a level, to not have just that over anxious. And people are overstimulated as it is, and then you have everyone's trying to advertise everything. Like we're working with on studies for advertising of making sure that we're not overfilling it, overdoing where concessionaires can put their advertising, because there's so many there's so much visual stimulants and acoustic stimulus and lighting stimulus that the natural light, the calmness that's how it's going to make that experience better. And so when I get the response from friends who have said, well, I was here and then I came there and this is what I felt, it's you can kind of talk to them about how it was really crowded, it was really loud, it was really small, I couldn't figure out where I was going, and that's what makes someone have a terrible experience. And so we gather all that information and then counter everything, and we say, hey, people don't like this, so here's how we're going to solving this, and this.
Yeah, that's interesting. It also makes me think about, I think I went to HCD, which is the Healthcare Design Conference, and there was a presentation that was given, and it was all about like kind of acoustics in an ICU wing, and how basically the way that the program was laid out kept a lot of the staff kind of more interior to that corridor, and then of course your patients are on the outside. You have to have that visual outside, but by keeping a lot of the staff more internal, it kind of minimizes a lot of the extra cart rolling, the noise, all of those things that really you don't realize when you're in like a silence or like a quiet space and you're trying to heal, that like, oh, you're going to notice this. You're already a little bit anxious because you can't really do, you don't really know the state of your health maybe, or you do, etc. But, and then there's all the monitors and the beeping and all of that. And so they found essentially that like by flipping the layout and then of course additional acoustics, etc., like people's like rate of like, return to normal was so much quicker. Like they were able to get out of that ICU unit much more quickly than kind of in your traditional layout. And so it's like similar concepts applied in different ways.
Gabriel, Callie, thank you guys so much for your time today. Really got a lot out of this, and I really appreciate all of the kind of effort and attention you put into your projects. It was great to hear from y'all.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun to join. Yeah.
Fun.
We'll see you next time on TheSquare.